New at 5 tonight, we have our border correspondent Robert Sherman joining us, who has been reporting from Montana, talking about drug cartels and how they're working inside American cities, towns, and rural communities. Robert, thanks so much for being with us. You know, along the southern border, we have El Paso here for us, Ciudad Juarez, where there has been a surge of migrants and cartel issues, you name it. Are you seeing the same situation up in Montana? Tell me what you're saying.
You know, it is pretty amazing is that we didn't really think that our investigation would take us over 1,000 miles away from the U.S.-Mexico border. But what we have found here is that I'm sure it's not a surprise, you know, in many border states such as Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California to see the presence of cartels and those organizations there. But to see them all the way up here was pretty shocking to us. And a couple years ago, this used to just be a law enforcement theory that this presence was up here. But now they're starting to make more and more arrests of full-fledged cartel members. They're starting to see more and more fentanyl on the streets. They're starting to see more violent crime, more shootings, more murders in cities such as Billings, for example. And law enforcement brings just about all of it back to the invasion of cartels here into a state such as this. And the emphasis that law enforcement makes is that this is no longer just a border state issue. This is no longer just a Sun Belt issue. This is an issue that is impacting all 50 states here in the country, and it's going to take a collective effort in order to move forward.
You know, with your talks with the DEA, I mean, what else is this associated with the drug cartel violence?
Right, you know, I mean, what they have found is that it's an all-encompassing basket, right? You know, I mean, especially, you know, when you look at the criminal activity taking place in a state such as Montana. I mean, they say that just about all the drugs here in this state are, for the most part, coming from south of the border. They say about 90% of the crime that's happening in this state is related to those drug trafficking issues that comes out of that cartel activity as well. So, I mean, they say that it all ends up feeding together and tying together, which is what makes this all so complicated to deal with, especially because when you have the issue of dealing with an interstate issue. I mean, you have drugs being moved from state to state, you have criminal activity going across state lines as well. That's where a lot of this gets complicated to deal with. But the main point of emphasis that they make is that it comes back to the U.S.-Mexico border. Trying to stem the flow of drugs into the United States is their chief concern.
Now, Robert, do you happen to know which groups or group of cartels would you say pose the greatest drug threat in the U.S., and which one of those is using, you know, our state, Texas, as a crossing point?
Right, we know that especially up here, the Sinaloa cartel is the one that we've been hearing the name of the most, and that's the one that law enforcement says for the most part has the largest presence in the United States. You know, Texas is a mixed bag because you have so many different cartel organizations that are operating just south of the border and then, of course, within the state itself. So it is a little bit more hard to pinpoint exactly, you know, which ones are having the largest impact coming out of Texas and some of those states. But I will tell you this is that, look, I mean, there is a presence now in every single one of these states, and you are starting to see those launch pads coming out of many of these border territories and border states. So it's an all-encompassing issue that law enforcement has to deal with.
A lot of team effort there. You know, recently Governor Abbott hired on a new Texas border czar to oversee the border security, construction of the wall. Do you believe this could help with the fight against drugs, border encounters, cartels like you've been talking about, or what do you think needs to be done?
Well, for the most part, whenever we talk to law enforcement, they say it largely starts and ends at the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's keep in mind here is that whenever we've had the conversations with border agents, they estimate that they're only stopping about 5 to 10% of the drugs that are coming into the United States. That's pretty staggering. I mean, that means that the far majority of drugs are still finding a way to make their way into the United States of America. So that's where they emphasize is the big issue there. And of course, being vigilant up here, you know, in states such as this, that's going to be a key issue. But right now, the expectation is that this issue will get worse before it gets better unless you start to stem the flow of drugs coming into the U.S. at the border.
All right, Robert, thank you so much. And hey, if you're just joining us right now, this is Robert Sherman, our border correspondent. Please be safe while you're out there. Thank you so much. And if you're just joining us right now, some of the key points Robert touches on. Agencies have revealed that members of cartels are now living in all 50 states. Last year, the DEA says it seized more than 50 million fake pills and 10,000 pounds of fentanyl. And the Sinaloa cartel, the oldest drug trafficking group in Mexico, typically smuggles drugs into the U.S. through Texas, Arizona, and California. And you can catch this full report, Cartels in America, tonight at 7 on Cuomo.